What's up?
Everyone is happy when the wizard walks by.
Welcome, mortals, to the Wizard Hour podcast. I am your host, Jay Devious, the supreme sorcerer of the silly and high mage of the macabre. Welcome to the show. Now, I know what you're asking. Why would you, a mage, a wizard of your caliber, start a podcast? Well, first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in the year 973 in Constantinople. That was the capital of Rome at the time, the Roman Empire, that is. I am trained in various schools of magic and alchemy, too many to number. I once did mushrooms with Odin, the Allfather, cool guy. He taught me runic magic. And I have advised kings and emperors to varying degrees of success. But I digress. That does not answer the question of why one such as I would start a podcast. And, well, the answer is quite simple. After living over 1,000 years, mostly in the shadows, I figure it's time to put myself out there, share my wisdom and knowledge with all of you mortals, explore some absurd and obscure stories, and anything that interests me. So, what will you find on this podcast? Well, you will find strange news and obscure history. You will find tales of the paranormal and the absurd, urban legends, if you will. You will also occasionally hear casual rantings and ravings about films, video games, books, professional wrestling, and whatever else I feel like musing upon. So, if that sounds like something up your alley, stick around. You just might find something you enjoy. And without further ado, let's get on with the first episode. Summon the Orb! Boy, I tell you, they don't make orbs like they used to. This is my portable lap orb. Of course, I have many orbs in my collection. Don't question me. I'll turn you into a sea otter. Our first story for today. Remember the plague?
Wizard!
Man dies from the plague in northern Arizona. This happened earlier in the month of July. A resident of Coconino County, northern Arizona, has died from pneumonic plague, health officials said. Earlier this week in the Coconino, sorry, mortals, I'm running on 3 hours of sleep and 5 mana potions. Always drink your mana potions. Okay. Earlier in the week, the Coconino County Health and Human Services, or the CCHHS, as if that is supposed to be easier to say, reported a prairie dog die-off in the Townsend, Winona area northeast of Flagstaff, which officials said can be an indicator of plague, as plague often spreads through the bites of fleas. Okay, makes sense. That tracks. The department noted, however, that the recent death is not related to the prairie dog die-off. So, all of you prairie dog haters out there, don't jump to conclusions. Don't you even think about blaming this plague outbreak on the prairie dogs. They had nothing to do with it. Although it was apparently still worth mentioning in the article. What is the plague? Plague is a bacterial infection known as the Black Death that killed tens of millions in 14th century Europe during an 8-year period from 1346 to 1353. That was a bummer time. I was around then. I was hanging out in London. I was drinking a lot of wine because the water wasn't clean to drink. So I spent most of my days in a stupor and with the locals, casting random spells, making thunderstorms happen. You know, just casual wizard things. It killed up to 60% of the population in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, according to estimates. Symptoms of the Black Death, named for the black spots that appear on infected bodies, include fever, chills, headache, weakness, and muscle pain, and some may develop swollen lymph nodes called buboes. most commonly in the groin, armpits, or limbs. Yeesh. U.S. health officials say plague symptoms typically appear within 8 days after exposure. Plague is rare to humans. However, pneumonic plague is the most deadly and easiest to spread. On average, there are about 7 cases of the plague reported annually in the U.S. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says 496 cases of plague were documented, mostly in the western and southwestern United States between 1970 and 2020, where they had stiff competition. I didn't realize that the plague was that much of a problem these days. I thought most everyone died off, and the plague doctors with their funny masks, I always got a kick out of those guys. I thought it was a cool wizard outfit, but I was laughed out of the Mages Guild one day for wearing one. I'm still bitter about it. This is the first recorded death from pneumonic plague in the county since 2007. Further details, including the identity of the victim, were not released, and no additional information about the death will be released out of respect for the family. I kissed the microphone on that. I don't know if the microphone picked it up. Mwah. There we go. What a bummer. Apparently the plague is still a problem, so if you reside in the western or southwestern United States, be careful. About 7 people around you every year get the plague. Moving on to the meat of this episode, I've been very eager to share this story with you all. Allow me to paint you a picture. The year is 1903. At that time, I was helping the Wright brothers work on their famous flying machine, for which they gave me no credit, but that's fine. Late one night, in the New Orleans French Quarter, a woman plummets from the second-story balcony of the home of a prominent socialite. Injured but not dead, the woman cried out in pain, catching the attention of some local mortals. When they came to her aid, the woman screamed and ranted that she had been attacked by a vampire. This curious incident jumpstarts the legend of one Jacques Saint Germain. Now, New Orleans is full of all kinds of been smoking on that troll gunk. New Orleans is full of all kinds of supernatural stories and legends, from ghosts and voodoo priestesses to vampires. Now, in my experience, vampires have always kind of been a bit of a mixed bag. Some of them are really fun to party with. Others are not so fun. Ever hear of a certain Colin Robinson? He thinks he's hot shit ever since he had his little reality show, but that guy sucks to hang out with. Anyway, chief among these vampire legends is the mysterious Jacques Saint Germain. Jacques arrived in New Orleans at the turn of the 20th century. He claimed that he was the direct descendant of the 18th century nobleman, the Count of Saint Germain, a close friend and retainer of King Louis XV. More on him later. Jacques quickly developed a reputation for being elegant, witty, wealthy, mysterious, and quite the ladies' man. He was frequently seen strolling with many a beautiful woman on his arm through the French Quarter and partying in voguish nightclubs. What he was most known for, however, was throwing sick parties. His parties were popular for great entertainment, lavish cuisine, and fine wine. Now, before I move on, I am sure many of you want to ask, I can neither confirm nor deny my presence at any of these parties, nor can I comment on the amount of baby oil present, okay? However, what really made his party so special was Jacques himself. He told fantastic stories of his travels in France, Italy, Africa, and Egypt. Curiously, though, many of his stories involved historical events that took place hundreds of years beforehand, and he spoke of them with such great detail, it was as if he were there to witness them himself. I know what you're thinking. Great mage! This is all well and good, but how does this make any of him a vampire? Well, if you remember, Jacques claimed to be the direct descendant of the 18th century nobleman, the Count of Saint Germain. Even though many people were skeptical of this claim, they couldn't help but recognize the strong resemblance he bore to the Count. Some noted that portraits of the Count of Saint Germain always depicted him around his mid-40s, the same age that Jacques appeared to be. A common joke of sorts began to spread that Jacques himself was the Count of Saint Germain, somehow rendered immortal. I doubt it. I of course, discovered the elixir for immortality in my youth. I suppose there are other formulas that other people could have invented, but I doubt it. Mine has worked just fine, and it's a patented secret in the Mages Guild. It was a joke that Jacques seemed to enjoy, but never fully addressed. More speculation ensued, and rumors of all kinds spread about the mysterious gentleman. One of these rumors was sparked by the realization by some guests that they had never seen Jacques eat, even at his own parties. It was said that Jacques only ever drank wine out of an ornate chalice. It's no reason to judge a man. Additionally, at these parties, everything from the cuisine to the silverware was catered. Now, this was odd because at this time in history, it was common practice to show off one's wealth with silverware. Silver utensils were often ornate and engraved with family insignias. Surely, one as wealthy and affluent as Jacques would have had his own silverware, especially considering that he was supposedly descended from such nobility. This left partygoers wondering what he could possibly use to eat on a regular basis, that is, if he ate at all. These strange qualities of Jacques, combined with his striking resemblance to the Count, led to some suggesting, in good fun, that perhaps Jacques was a vampire. This brings us back to that fateful evening in 1903. Police were called to the home of prominent socialite Jacques Saint Germain in response to a woman falling from his second-story balcony. The woman, who was rumored to be a working lady of the night, was hysterical and sobbed that she had in fact jumped from the balcony, not fallen. She had done so to escape from Saint Germain, whom, she claimed, had attacked her and bitten her neck. The police, not entirely believing her story, didn't even bother investigating Saint Germain's house or bringing him in for questioning because it was so late in the evening, they didn't want to disturb him. We don't want to bother you, sir, but we're sure that this crazy gal is just overreacting to something. Don't worry about it. They simply asked him, why don't you come into the station tomorrow, get this whole thing sorted out? But the next day, Jacques didn't show up. When the police came to his house to search for him, he wasn't there. He seemed to have vanished overnight without a trace. According to the legend, when police searched his house, they discovered a stash of wine bottles that had seemingly been opened and then recorked. Upon closer inspection, the bottles were filled with a concoction of wine and human blood. Now, I have to ask, how would they have known it was human blood? Did they have an alchemist on staff? It certainly wasn't me. I'm imagining some, poor policeman of the time in one of those big dome-shaped hats, taking a sip from the wine bottle, like doing a spit take. And then again, how would he have known that was blood? I guarantee you the guy who tasted it and knew it was blood, that guy's probably the real vampire. No one ever saw Saint Germain again. No more extravagant parties or fantastic stories to be told. With so many questions left unanswered, people were left to wonder about the man who had come and gone without a trace. Could he have been the Count of Saint Germain? Well, ladies and gentlemen, now that we've discussed Jacques, what of this enigmatic Count of Saint Germain that I've mentioned? According to author Marita Crandall, so much mystery, speculation, and silliness exists in writings around the Count's persona that, at times, one could almost conclude him a fictional character, but for the fact that many affluent leaders and prominent personalities of the time make note of his existence. So he for sure existed. In her book, New Orleans Vampires, History and Legend, Miss Crandall includes an excerpt of an ancient letter from Horace Walpole, the 4th Earl of Oxford, to his friend Horace Mann in reference to the Count of Saint Germain. It reads as follows. An odd man who goes by the name of Comte Saint Germain, he had been here these 2 years and will not tell who he is or whence, but professes that he does not go by his right name. He sings, plays on the violin wonderfully, composes, is mad, and not very sensible. Is this about the Count or myself? Huh. He is called an Italian, a Spaniard, a Pole, a somebody that married a great fortune in Mexico and ran away with her jewels to Constantinople. That's where I'm from. A priest, a fiddler, a vast nobleman, a joker, a smoker, a midnight toker. I'm just kidding about that last bit. According to various sources, he was known as a courtier of King Louis XV, an adventurer, a mystic, and an alchemist. Man of taste, I see. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the accomplished Voltaire referred to him as the Wonder Man. Now, Miss Crandall was not joking when she said there is so much written about this fellow, much of it contradictory and very silly. I have read tomes written by creatures of the nether realm that made more sense. So, keep in mind as we dive into the extraordinary tale of Saint Germain, much of what is written about him could rightfully be met with heavy skepticism. So, without further ado, let's break down this Wonder Man. With no official birth record to be found, the Count's origins are a matter of debate. Some say he was the son of the widow of Charles II of Spain. Others say he was a Portuguese Jew who married a woman of great wealth in Mexico, then ran off with her jewels. A cult writer, Isabel Cooper Oakley, claims that he was the son of Prince Franz Leopold Rakoczy. Rakoczy? Ragoxy. Of Transylvania. Rakoczy. That's what his name is. Rakoczy of Transylvania by his first wife, Princess Charlotte Amalia of Hesse. Due to a hostile political environment at the time, he was removed to Italy under the care of the last of the Medici family, John Gaston. There, he was believed to have studied at the University of Siena. This version of his origin was supposedly supported by Prince Karl of Hesse, more on him later, and Cesare Cantu, a librarian of the Great Library of Milan. Never been there. However, author Jean Overton Fuller claims that this theory is only speculation, but in some ways, this theory holds weight when you consider a few things. Firstly, the title he took for himself, Sanctus Germano, or Holy Brother, appears to be a reference to his half-siblings under Prince Rakoczy, whom were titled St. Carl and St. Elizabeth. Additionally, his incessant use of alternative titles, too many to list, and his refusal to give his true name except to the King of France seems to indicate that he was protecting some kind of royal lineage. Cooper Oakley notes that this was a common custom for persons of a certain position to use various names and titles to avoid, quote, vulgar curiosity. You know, as an accomplished wizard myself, I can relate. Regardless of his origin, he seems to have arrived in King Louis XV's court in 1748. Other sources claim 1756. At the very least, his presence in France in 1756 is documented by a letter penned for him by a clerk. It is the one and only time he uses what resembles a Christian name. The letter is signed, quote, I have the honor to be Denis de S.M. Comte Saint-Germain, end quote. It is possible that Denis is his given name. However, it could be another pseudonym. And no one seems to know what SM stood for. When he arrived, he claimed that he wished to help the French economy with an invention, a method by which he created vibrant dyes used for clothing and other materials. I myself bought a few robes using his dyes. They were pretty nice. He was a hit in the court and with the king himself for his remarkable talent as a musician, his skills as a linguist. He spoke French, English, German, Italian, to name a few, and his skills as an alchemist. I found him a rather mid-alchemist, as the kids would say, but, you know, that's just one humble wizard's opinion. He was also said to be ambidextrous, able to write on 2 separate pages of a journal at the same time with remarkable penmanship and coherent thought. Da Vinci did that first. I don't see why that's such a big deal. In addition to being an insufferable know-it-all, Saint Germain also told very entertaining stories, much like our old friend Jacques in New Orleans. Once again, many of these stories involved notable historical milestones, some of which took place 500 years prior. He also claimed to have had conversations with Cleopatra herself and the Queen of Sheba. Reportedly, the Count eventually found himself going on diplomatic missions for the king, much to the chagrin of other courtiers and the king's own chief minister. A key mission involved attempting to negotiate peace with England during the 7 Years' War. Multiple sources confirm he served as a secret negotiator or authorized agent directly appointed by Louis XV. This tension with the king's chief minister, along with his seemingly unending amount of wealth despite being unemployed, led to speculation that he was some kind of spy sent to undermine the French monarchy. At one point, he was detained and interrogated by the Secretary of State. During his interrogation, Saint Germain refused to give his real name, his title, or occupation, unless he could speak to the king himself. Although this was extremely frustrating to the Secretary of State, he could not prove that Saint Germain was a spy, nor had he broken any laws. This, combined with an unsuccessful search of the Count's apartment, led to his release. However, due to the growing what's the word I'm looking for? I've been alive over 1,000 years. I still haven't mastered language. Due to the However, due to the chief minister continuing to lead his campaign to discredit and arrest Saint Germain, the Count eventually fled Paris. This certainly wasn't the last of his travels, though. During his lifetime, the Count Saint Germain reportedly rubbed shoulders with many notable historical figures, including Marie Antoinette, she had lovely hair, Catherine the Great, whom I don't even know where to begin with that one. Voltaire, man, I miss him. He was such a cool dude. He and I used to get drunk and heckle the local Catholic priests. It was great. I would occasionally shapeshift into a young boy, lead him into an alley, and then me and Voltaire would jump him. It's a good time. Is that joke too far? Occasionally, I would shapeshift into a young boy. No, here, I got it. And occasionally, after we got enough meat in us, I would shapeshift into a young boy, and I would do little sexy dances and lure him into it. We got it. The joke's in there. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you have him in part to thank for your modern democracy. Franz Mesmer, a fellow wizard. And the one and only Casanova. A hack of a wizard, if you ask me. The Count claimed to have traveled to Africa, India, China, Persia, and Japan. It can be confirmed that he spent time in Venice, England, Vienna, Paris, St. Petersburg, Brussels, Berlin, Mantua, Treesdorf, Leipzig, Dresden, and Hamburg. As if his life wasn't bizarre enough already, during his time in St. Petersburg in Russia, it is said that he had an important part to play in the conspiracy against Tsar Peter III, a plot that would place Catherine the Great on the throne. After these escapades in Russia, he then went to Germany where, according to the Memoir Authentique of the adventurer the Count di Cagliostro... Cagliostro? That's the guy from the Spawn movie. Well, according to Cagliostro, Saint Germain was the founder of Freemasonry and initiated Cagliostro into that rite. After frequenting several German courts, Saint Germain took up his residence in Schleswig-Holstein, where he and the Prince Charles of Hesse pursued together the study of secret sciences. Secret sciences, fellas? Really? How'd those secret science experiments go? You happen to explore each other's rippling bodies, smell each other's smelly pantaloons, lock eyes with the rear iris. It's okay, just say it. You know? Secret sciences. That's crazy. Okay. The Count allegedly died in Schleswig in 1784. More on that later. Of the many things the Count was famous for, he was known for his talent for alchemy and other purported abilities that extended beyond the mere intellectual and into the occult. He was renowned for his power to improve precious stones, specifically melting jewels, a knowledge he claimed to have acquired during his second journey to India with General Clive. That is not where I learned alchemy. Indeed, he would often appear in King Louis's court in sensible attire, but draped with impeccable jewelry. I can confirm this. Dude's shoe buckles, sick. Moving on. On the note of his alchemical abilities, a certain Madame du Hausset recounts a story where he removed a flaw from a diamond without reducing its size. It's typical alchemical fare. He claimed to have been able to, quote, make pearls grow by giving them the finest water. That sounds like horseshit. Graf Karl Koblenzel says he witnessed the Count transmute iron into pure gold. The things that amaze you mortals amazes me. That is a mid-tier alteration spell. I can do it easily. Meanwhile, this Graf Karl person is exclaiming this to the halls of history as if it's something to be noted. I once turned a pearl into a cheeseburger. You don't see me bragging about it. No one's certainly ever told my story. Anyway, in another similarity to Jacques Saint-Germain, he was seemingly ageless. Countess V. Gergi, that is the only way I know how to pronounce that name, and I will stick with it, who met the Count in 1710, stated that he appeared around 45 years old. And upon meeting him again decades later, she exclaimed to him, "You, at the outside, are that same age at present." To which Saint-Germain responded, "Madame, I am very old." Humble flex. I dig that. Indeed, an account from Madame du Hausset reinforces this, stating that he appeared to be about 40 to 45 years old, even after decades of knowing him. One woman even claimed that he gifted her an elixir that, quote, for fully a quarter of a century, preserved my youthful charms that I possessed at 25. Only a 25-year shelf life I see on that potion. Lame. Another one of my favorite rumors was that the Count claimed he had intercourse with ghosts and supernatural beings who appeared at his call. Now, from one wizard to another, sir, that is a gross violation of the laws of necromancy, and there are consequences for such violations, none that I would know about. Other strange abilities the Count claimed to have had was the ability to, quote, tame bees and make snakes listen to music, which every aspiring musician does at some point in their career. Another interesting power in his repertoire was the power of foresight, particularly regarding the French Revolution. He explicitly warned one Madame de Audemars of a, quote, gigantic conspiracy, leading to the overthrow of what exists, predicting the downfall of the monarchy, clergy, nobility, and the magistracy, and the rise of a greedy republic whose scepter will be the axe of the executioner. His prophecies for France, including civil war, murder, pillage, and exile, and the eventual return of the Bourbons to the status of, quote, simple private individuals, are explicitly stated to have been, quote, accurately correct in every detail, end quote, over a century later. He also foresaw the murder of Gustavus III of Sweden and the advent of trains and steamboats. I can't make a comment about those last two, but in my humble, magical opinion, you don't need to be a wizard to predict civil war, murder, pillage, and the downfall of a ruling class. It's what you mortals do. I've seen it play out many times over the course of my 1,000 years. I feel like that is a weak claim to wizardry, sir, and I don't very much appreciate it. This guy thinks he's Paul Muad'Dib or something. Anyway, moving on. The mystery surrounding Saint-Germain extends to his alleged death, with compelling evidence suggesting that he continued his activities long after the commonly accepted date of his death. The Church Register of Eckernford records his death on February 27th, 1784, and a private burial ceremony on March 2nd under the name Comte de Saint-Germain and Weldon. However, multiple mortals claim to have seen him and spoke with him many years after his supposed death. In 1785, he was, quote, included with St. Martin, among many others, at a Freemasons conference. The Comte de Chalons reported that he spoke to the Count of Saint-Germain in Venice in 1788. In post-revolutionary France, the Madame de Audemars explicitly states that she saw him, quote, 5 times more after his supposed death, coincidentally at key historical events. Those being at the assassination of the Queen in 1793, in 1799 during Napoleon's coup, the day following the death of the Duke of Enghien in 1804. This is my favorite one. It's so vague. In the month of January, 1813. That is a key historical event, the month of January. Well, it is in recent history. Ew. The 5th and final time was on the eve of the murder of the Duc de Bern in 1820. In 1821, Madame de Audemars wrote, "I await the 6th visit when God wills." Unfortunately, she would pass away in 1822, never seeing the Count again. And thus concludes the tale of the Count of Saint Germain. Or does it? What do we think of Jacques in New Orleans in 1903? Could he have been the Count? They both had an affinity for telling grand stories, throwing sick parties, drinking wine out of chalices, I assume. I don't know. What do you think? I hope you all enjoyed the story. This was my first time researching into a subject such as this. I've lived thousands of years, never had to do a research project. It was a lot of fun. I hope you had fun listening to it. Give me your opinion. If I got anything wrong about the story of either Saint Germain's, please leave a comment. Engage with me. If I pronounced any names wrong, which I am positive I did, don't leave a comment. I don't need to hear it. I really appreciate all of you mortals tuning in. Stick around. We have more episodes incoming, more spooky and absurd pieces of news. Oh, shit. I don't know whether or not that story took actually an hour, but don't worry. It's all part of my plan. As a famous wizard once said, a wizard never finishes early or late. He finishes precisely when he means to. Or something like that. Wizard out.
Peanut butter.